Let me say something to you, and I want you to really sit with this. You think she rejected you and moved on like nothing happened. You think when she said, "I don't see us working," that was the end of it. You think she walked away unaffected. But what if I told you? The moment you went silent, truly silent, something shifted in her mind in a way you don't understand. And most men completely miss this. Here's the uncomfortable truth. Rejection doesn't always end emotional attachment. Sometimes it intensifies it. And when you responded to her rejection not with begging, not with anger, not with another paragraph explaining yourself, but with calm, controlled silence, you did something psychologically powerful. Now listen carefully. This isn't about manipulation. This isn't about winning her back. This is about understanding avoidant psychology, how certain people process connection, control, and emotional distance. Avoidant personalities often feel safest when they are the one pulling away. When they reject you, they expect one of two things: pursuit or emotional reaction. They expect resistance. They expect you to try to convince them. They expect your ego to flare up. But when you didn't, when you simply accepted it and disappeared from the emotional battlefield, you removed the dynamic they were prepared for. And that's when the internal conflict begins. Because silence does something powerful. It forces someone to sit alone with their decision. It removes validation. It removes reassurance. It removes the comfort of knowing you're still emotionally available. And for someone who already struggles with emotional closeness, that absence can feel heavier than your presence ever did. Now understand me clearly. This is not about revenge. It's about awareness. Many men don't realize that composure after rejection communicates strength, self-respect, and emotional stability. And ironically, those are the exact qualities that trigger deep reconsideration in someone who values independence and control. In this video, we're going to break down what actually happens in the mind of an avoidant after you go silent, why your silence unsettles them more than your words ever could, and why most men sabotage their power before it ever has time to work. Stay with me, because this conversation might change the way you see rejection forever. Let me start this section with something that might challenge you. Most men think silence is weakness. They think if they don't respond, explain, defend themselves, or chase, they look passive. They think strength means saying something powerful, proving a point, or getting the last word. But when you're dealing with an avoidant personality, silence isn't passive. It's disruptive. And here's why. Avoidant psychology is built around control of emotional distance. These individuals feel safest when they are the ones deciding how close or far the connection goes. If things feel too intense, too vulnerable, or too uncertain, they create space. That's their regulation strategy. So when she rejected you, in her mind, she controlled the outcome. She controlled the distance. She ended the emotional negotiation. What she expects next is predictable. She expects you to argue, you to try to convince her, you to ask for another chance, or at minimum, to stay emotionally available. Even if she doesn't want the relationship, she often expects access to your emotional energy. Now here's where most men collapse. They react immediately. They explain themselves. They plead. They send long messages trying to clarify misunderstandings. They keep the emotional door open wide. But when you don't, when you respond calmly, accept it, and genuinely withdraw, you remove her sense of control over the emotional dynamic. And psychologically, that creates discomfort. Because now, she cannot measure where she stands with you. She cannot feel your emotional availability. She cannot predict your next move. The emotional safety of knowing you still want her is gone. Silence introduces uncertainty. And uncertainty is extremely uncomfortable for someone who values independence and emotional distance as a coping mechanism. Now understand this clearly. This does not mean she is destroyed. It means she is forced to process something she didn't expect, the possibility of losing influence over you. When you disappear emotionally, you are no longer chasing reassurance. You are no longer proving your value. You are no longer reacting. You are regulating yourself. And that signals something powerful. It communicates. You respect yourself. You accept reality. You are not dependent on her validation. You can walk away without chaos. For an avoidant personality, This flips the dynamic internally, because they are used to being the one who withdraws first. But now you've done it, calmly. And when that happens, their mind begins to ask quiet questions. Why isn't he reacting? Did I misjudge him? Is he already moving on? Did I just lose something stable? And here's the key lesson for you as a man. Silence only works when it's real. If you're silent but obsessing, checking her socials, waiting for a message, that's not emotional strength. That's suppressed anxiety. But if your silence comes from genuine acceptance and self-control, that's different. You're not trying to punish her. You're not playing games. You're simply choosing not to compete for someone who stepped away. And that level of composure is rare. Avoidants are deeply sensitive to shifts in emotional availability. When access disappears without drama, it creates internal reflection. So understand this. Your silence after rejection isn't about hurting someone. It's about reclaiming your emotional leadership. And when you lead yourself, instead of chasing someone else's validation, the psychological effect is far stronger than any argument you could have made. In the next section, we'll break down what actually happens internally when she starts realizing your absence isn't temporary, and why that realization hits harder than most men realize. Let me ask you something. When you went silent, did you mean it? Or were you secretly hoping she'd panic within 48 hours? Because here's the part most men don't understand. Silence doesn't hit immediately. At first, she may feel relief, especially if she leans avoidant. Rejection creates space. Space feels safe. The pressure is gone. The emotional intensity is reduced. She regains control. And in those early days, she might feel calm. But then something subtle starts to shift. Because silence, real silence, removes emotional feedback. There are no check-ins. No, just seeing how you're doing. No subtle reminders that you're still emotionally available. And the human brain does something very interesting when access disappears. It starts replaying. Avoidant individuals often suppress emotional processing in the moment. They don't always feel the full weight of connection while they're inside it. Distance gives them clarity. So when you're gone, genuinely gone, the mind begins reconstructing the relationship without the stress that triggered the rejection. Now there's no pressure to decide. No need to defend their choice. No need to maintain emotional boundaries actively. And that's when memory softens. The brain tends to reduce negative emotional intensity over time and highlight safety, comfort, and familiarity. Especially when there is no new stimulus replacing you. This is where most men sabotage themselves. They break silence too early. They check in. They post indirect messages. They try to remind her what she's missing. And what does that do? It resets the avoidant sense of control. It confirms you're still accessible. It removes the uncertainty. But if you don't, if your silence stretches, calm, steady, unreactive, something deeper begins. She may start wondering, did he detach that quickly? Was I less important than I thought? Is he treating this as final? Understand something important. Avoidant psychology often includes a fear of being engulfed, but also a quiet fear of being abandoned. It's a paradox. They push away when things feel intense, but they don't expect to feel replaced. And when your silence signals that you are not waiting, not hovering, not emotionally lingering, that's when the internal discomfort rises. Not because she lost control over you alone, but because she's now sitting with the possibility that she miscalculated your value. Now listen carefully. This is not about hoping she suffers. That mindset keeps you emotionally attached. This is about recognizing how psychological dynamics work. Silence forces internal processing. It forces someone to live with the consequences of their decision without your emotional cushioning. And that can feel heavy. But here's the part you must understand as a man. Your silence is powerful only when it reflects self-respect, not strategy. If you're silent as a tactic, your energy feels tense. You're waiting, watching, counting days. If you're silent because you accepted the rejection and chose growth, your energy feels stable, grounded, unbothered. And that difference matters more than you think. Because people don't just respond to actions. They respond to emotional state. In the next section, we're going to talk about something even more uncomfortable. why many men mistake emotional composure for emotional indifference, and how that misunderstanding changes everything. Let's be honest for a second. When you stayed calm after the rejection, part of you probably wondered if it even mattered. No speech, no emotional reaction, no dramatic exit, just silence. And in your head you might have thought, maybe she doesn't even care. But here's what most men don't realize. Composure creates psychological tension. Not noise, not chaos. Tension. When you don't react the way someone expects, it forces them to reassess you. Especially someone who is used to emotional distance being their advantage. Avoidant personalities are comfortable managing space. They know how to detach. They know how to cool things down. They are prepared for emotional reactions. They are not prepared for emotional stability. When you respond with calm acceptance, you disrupt the narrative. You didn't argue. You didn't defend. You didn't try to prove your worth. You didn't chase for clarity. You simply respected the decision. And here's the part that hits deeper than most men understand. Composure signals that your identity is not dependent on her choice. That's powerful. Because rejection often creates an ego response. It triggers the need to restore pride, to fight for validation, to prove that you were worth more than the outcome. But when you don't do that, when you maintain structure in your life, stay disciplined, focus on your path, and don't orbit around her decision, it communicates emotional independence. And emotional independence is rare. Avoidant individuals are sensitive to emotional pressure, but they are also sensitive to emotional strength. They can sense when someone is secure versus when someone is silently collapsing. If you're truly composed, there's no bitterness in your silence, no passive aggression, no performative detachment. It's quiet, it's grounded, and grounded energy forces reflection. Because now, instead of reacting to your emotions, she is reacting to your absence. There's nothing to push against, nothing to escape from, nothing to defend. Just space, and space can amplify thoughts. She may start replaying your calmness. She may question whether she underestimated your depth. She may wonder why you didn't fight harder, not because she wanted chaos, but because your steadiness didn't fit the script she expected. Here's the lesson for you. Composure is not about pretending you don't care. It's about controlling your response even when you do. And that control does something subtle but powerful. It shifts you from being reactive to being centered. When a man is centered, he doesn't chase clarity from someone who stepped away. He doesn't scramble to correct perception. He doesn't beg to be understood. He lets reality speak. And that alone changes how you're remembered. In the next section, we're going to address something uncomfortable, where men get this completely wrong, and how ego can quietly sabotage everything you think you're doing right. Let me slow this down for a minute. Because this is where I need to challenge you. Some of you aren't silent because you're emotionally strong. You're silent because you're hurt. And there's a difference. If your silence is filled with resentment, silent competition, or an internal desire to teach her a lesson, then you're not leading, you're reacting in disguise. And avoidant personalities can feel that energy. You see, when men hear that silence creates impact, they sometimes turn it into a strategy. They start counting days. They hope she notices. They secretly wait for validation. That's not composure. That's ego waiting for applause. Here's the uncomfortable truth. If you're silent to prove your value, you still need her recognition. And needing recognition keeps you emotionally tethered. Now listen carefully. There's nothing weak about feeling disappointed after rejection. That's human. But what weakens you is building your identity around how she responds afterward. If she reaches out and you feel powerful, that means you were still waiting. If she doesn't reach out and you feel worthless, that means your silence wasn't grounded. Real emotional strength is indifferent to outcome. And many men aren't there yet. They confuse emotional shutdown with emotional control. They think ignoring someone automatically equals self-respect. But sometimes it's just avoidance wearing a masculine mask. So let me give you a wake-up piece of advice. If you're going silent, make sure it's because you accepted the reality, not because you're trying to create one. Silence is powerful only when it reflects growth. Are you improving yourself? Are you focusing on your discipline, your health, your mission? Or are you just refreshing her profile in private? Be honest with yourself. Avoidant psychology responds to emotional stability, not performance. If you're silent but unstable internally, eventually it leaks. It shows in subtle behaviors. It shows in how quickly you break your boundary, and the moment you break it impulsively, the dynamic resets. So here's the correction. Your silence should not be about her at all. It should be about you reclaiming emotional self-control. It should be about recognizing that rejection is not a negotiation. It's information. And when you treat it as information instead of an attack on your identity, you mature instantly. Men who grow from rejection become sharper, calmer, more selective. Men who personalize rejection become reactive, bitter, performative. So ask yourself, which one are you becoming? Because the real power in silence isn't that it unsettles her. It's that it stabilizes you. And when you are stable, you don't need to monitor anyone's reaction. In the final section, we're going to talk about what happens long-term, and why sometimes the person who walked away ends up confronting something they were trying to avoid all along. Let me leave you with something most men don't think about. Short-term silence creates curiosity. Long-term silence creates clarity. And clarity is where the real psychological shift happens. When enough time passes and you don't reappear, when there's no emotional check-in, no random message, no attempt to reinsert yourself into her life, something deeper begins to surface. Because now, it's no longer about control. It's about reality. Avoidant personalities are skilled at creating space when emotions feel overwhelming. But distance over time removes the intensity and leaves only reflection. Without pressure, without arguments, without emotional noise, the connection gets evaluated differently. And here's what matters. If the relationship had genuine depth, your absence becomes noticeable in ways she didn't expect. Not dramatic, not explosive, just subtle awareness. Your consistency, your steadiness, your presence, your reliability. When those things are gone, they're often felt more clearly. But here's the part you need to understand as a man. By the time that clarity happens, you should not be the same person who got rejected. This is where many men fail. They stay frozen in the moment. They wait emotionally in the exact place they were left. Growth is what makes silence powerful long-term. If months pass and you're still mentally replaying the rejection, you didn't use the distance correctly. Distance is an opportunity to strengthen your routines, sharpen your focus, improve your emotional regulation, upgrade your standards. Because whether she comes back or not, your evolution is the real outcome. Now let's address something calmly and clearly. Sometimes, yes, avoidant individuals do circle back. When emotional pressure is gone and they feel safe enough to reevaluate, they may reach out. Not because they were destroyed, not because they were defeated, but because time gave them perspective. And if that happens, you should be responding from a place of strength, not relief. Because if your silence was real, you've built a life that doesn't depend on her return. And if she never reaches out, you still win. Because you didn't chase someone who stepped away. You didn't collapse emotionally. You didn't beg for validation. You accepted reality and redirected your energy. That is psychological maturity. So the long-term effect of your silence isn't just about how she feels. It's about who you become. And when a man becomes disciplined, emotionally regulated, and self-directed after rejection, he doesn't just become more attractive. He becomes more selective. And that shift changes every relationship that comes after. Now let's bring this all together. Let me end with something that might sound controversial. Sometimes the most powerful thing you can do after rejection is absolutely nothing. Not because you're trying to hurt her, not because you're playing mind games, but because you finally understand that your value does not increase through persuasion. Here's the truth most men don't want to accept. If your silence destroyed anything, it wasn't her. It was the illusion that she had unlimited access to you. And once that illusion is gone, dynamics change. But listen carefully. The real victory was never about making her rethink her decision. It was about you refusing to abandon yourself just to keep someone else. That's growth. So I want to hear from you. Have you ever stayed silent after rejection? Did she reach out, or did you just become stronger from it? Drop your experience in the comments. Let's have an honest conversation. I read them, and I pay attention. And if this perspective shifted how you see rejection, subscribe for more. We're building something here, not just about relationships, but about emotional discipline. And trust me, the men who master that move differently.